And now, it's time for the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show with Snowden Bishop. Listen in as Snowden interviews cannabis industry pioneers, marijuana experts, policymakers, medical practitioners, patients, and other amazing individuals with compelling stories to share. It all happens right now. Here's the Cannabis Reporter, Snowden Bishop.
Hi, and welcome back to the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show. I'm your host, Snowden Bishop, and I thank you for joining me today. I am very excited to introduce our guests, filmmaker Windy Borman and Melissa Etheridge. They are two strong women who have used their God-given talent for storytelling to bring awareness about cannabis into the public eye. Having spent years of advocating myself, I often forget what it was like to feel that awkwardness talking to people about cannabis, especially when they didn't know. The stigma was like a dark fog that was hard to penetrate. And for a long time, I felt this twinge of uneasiness every time I'd hear from old friends who were astonished by my sudden interest in marijuana. Of course, invariably, I'd have to explain that I didn't suddenly become a stoner, as if I really needed to justify or defend the reasons why I am such a staunch advocate. The last night, while watching an amazing film titled Mary Jane's The Women of Weed, I was reminded of that sense of awkwardness. It wasn't until after 8 years of researching and writing about cannabis that I even stepped foot into a dispensary. And with zero hands-on experience with marijuana, I found myself a little embarrassed to have to ask about the variety of delivery methods and just that sense of feeling like I just wasn't cool. I wasn't in the know. Anyway, that is the topic of today's show. And I am absolutely delighted to introduce Windy Borman. She's a multi-award winning film director and producer and founder of DVA Productions. Her recent projects include directing and producing the 10-time award-winning film The Eyes of Thailand, which was narrated by Ashley Judd, and producing the big picture Rethinking Dyslexia, which premiered at Sundance and on HBO. Her other credits include producing performances for Dr. Maya Angelou and Margaret Cho while directing Vagina Monologues. Now she is talking about her new film titled Mary Jane's The Women of Weed, which I watched last night, and I was incredibly impressed. And I am really absolutely delighted that you could be here today. Windy, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank you for reminding me of those ever so crazy moments. Like the first time you walked into a dispensary, I sat there and I felt it. I was like, oh
right?
my God, I remember those.
Good.
So anyway, thank you for that. Tell me a little bit about that.
So in 2014, I moved to Colorado. And I was not a cannabis user. So even though adult use for cannabis sales was legal, I didn't really have any interest in trying it. But I couldn't ignore all these amazing stories about women having success in the cannabis industry. So I just kind of filed that away as something I was curious about until 2015. And that's when I heard a statistic that 36% of leadership in the cannabis industry was women. And when you compare that to the national average, which is 22%, there was something about cannabis that was attracting more female leadership. So at that point, that piqued my curiosity enough to start interviewing people over the phone to just try to wrap my head around this concept. And what I soon realized was not only was cannabis a leader in gender parity, but it also included social justice and environmental sustainability. And those three core values had been present in all my other films. And so I realized that even if I was not a cannabis consumer, I could help elevate and celebrate the stories of women who were having success in the industry. And that was a really great opportunity as a filmmaker because the film became an intersectional feminist film that focused on opportunity as opposed to female oppression.
I love that about the film. I mean, it really was quite empowering when you see the strength that's coming in. And one of the things that was mentioned by one of your subjects was the fact that women tend to be the nurturers in our society, and if more women were running things, there would be a lot less violence and conflict. I found that to be really interesting. And that aspect of the woman nurturer is such a core part of the cannabis movement. Did you get the sense from any of them, any fear of what might happen once this does become federally legal and you start getting the male-dominated corporate interests involved?
Well, sadly, it's already happening. Since the film came out on the film festival circuit in 2017, we saw a dip in female leadership in cannabis down to 27%. And I attribute that to the fact that in 2016, we had 8 more states come on board with some type of cannabis legalization. And with that, it opened the doors for traditional funding models to come in. And the people that typically fund businesses are old, rich white guys, and they have a specific way of doing business, right? So they are trying to apply this old world male paradigm for how we do business and what type of companies we fund onto the cannabis movement while it's becoming an industry. So they're not necessarily funding the companies of the activists who helped get patients access or wrote the legalization for people to vote on or got out the vote or, really helped write the corporate responsibility or the equitable business practices that went into how we structure the cannabis industry. And that's part of the growing pains that's happening right now. But we know how to fix that, right? If we look at other industries, the way we're able to encourage and support female leadership and people of color in leadership is we need to provide access to funding and we need to provide access to mentorship. Specifically, we need women and men who are interested in funding women-owned businesses. And then for mentorship, we need to make sure that we're not just comfortable with one diverse face in a boardroom surrounded by a bunch of white guys. We need to make sure that we're mentoring the next round of leaders so that we really do have 50%.
I also really loved, you have a scene in there about the NAACP and the efforts to change policies in some of these states that don't allow people convicted of marijuana crimes to enter the business, and in some cases not even get a medical card.
So there's actually a couple different groups that are working on this. I think you're specifically talking about a scene when we looked at the Massachusetts legalization efforts. So the woman who helped draft the law that everybody voted on, Shalene Title, was really instrumental in making sure that if people had a marijuana conviction, whether it was possession or whatever, they may not be excluded from participating in the industry. And that's one way that we help give back to communities that had been targeted by the war on drugs, because we know that people of color are 3.7 times more likely to be arrested for simple possession of marijuana. But we know that use is pretty much equal across all ethnicities. So to rebalance the scales, we need to make sure, number one, that we're expunging criminal records and making sure that people no longer have to bear the burden of getting arrested for something a couple years ago that's now legal in the state. And then we need to make sure that we're offering business accelerator or incubator support so that people learn how to write a business plan, create a pitch deck, speak to investors, and that way they're set up for success to become business owners in this new industry.
Yeah, because I think that without those safeguards in place, you would have a lack of diversity, for sure. You know, people of color or gender diversity. So, I mean, kudos for bringing that up, because I think that's one topic that doesn't get so much airplay when people are talking about, you know, the wonders of this substance or the amazing progress of the industry. I thought it was really, really interesting. That 3.7 is actually higher when you compare the people arrested, because that really just that's how many people go into the system. But once arrested, this is something else that one of your subjects talked about. After being arrested, they have a much greater chance, if they're people of color or from poor neighborhoods, of being incarcerated after that arrest. So I think it moves more like 4 times greater risk of actually being incarcerated at the end of the day.
Yeah, and seeing those statistics and having those conversations was really what opened my eyes as a cannabis outsider to realize the propaganda that we had been sold. You know, I didn't necessarily start out as a cannabis advocate, but I became one after meeting all of these women who were able to enlighten me and say, here's the data. This is what we know is happening. And we just weren't talking about it.
So you have some big news. You were actually awarded twice in the last couple of weeks.
Well, it's always wonderful as a filmmaker to make a film that really resonates with audiences. And I'm extremely grateful to share that we've actually received 2 awards recently for the Mary Jane's documentary. So the first we received was a Visionary Award from the Palm Springs Cannabis Film Festival. And we also received the Best Documentary Pro Action Award from the Artemis Film Festival. So we're now a 2-time award-winning film, and that's not a bad week to have.
No, that's excellent. Congratulations on that, and well-deserved. I mean, your film was very eye-opening, and I know that it's going to make a big impact on a lot of people. So congratulations again.
Thank you. And, you know, we're just thrilled that we've created a story that is speaking to an audience in a really powerful way. You know, we can map things out and put together a story structure and make really cool graphics and have wonderful interviews with people like Melissa Etheridge and include great music. But at the end of the day, we want to be able to move the needle forward on some of these calls to action for increasing support for female leadership, for making sure that as we're building a cannabis industry, we're addressing social justice issues, and that we're doing this from a sustainable perspective. You know, a lot of people like to say that anything that we make out of plastic, we can make out of hemp. Well, that's true if we fund it appropriately and we take care of the environment while we're building this industry. You know, we don't want corporate responsibility to be an afterthought. If we're building a new industry, let's do it right from the ground up.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one of the biggest problems facing entrepreneurs in this space, or innovators, I should say, people who do want to start transitioning off of petrochemicals for making things like, you know, plastic cups or bags or whatever, we don't have the infrastructure here in this country yet. And, you know, it's something that I think takes films like yours and messages like those delivered by Melissa to get people to understand, hey, there is some huge opportunity for everyone to prosper with cannabis if only we get out of our own ways. But yeah, and I liked how you handled that in the film too, and bringing in some of those sinister reasons why cannabis was ever made illegal in the first place. I mean, it's an atrocity of justice, the way I look at it. Now that I know what I know.
Yeah. And once you know it, you can't unknow it. You know, so that's really why I use the word enlightened. You know, I became enlightened on this journey. I saw the light shined on the dark, shadowy parts of America, and to jump forward, I really think that our current federal administration is forcing us as Americans to wrestle with our shadow selves. You know, I think a lot of us, myself included, were really surprised that there was this dark underbelly of America. You know, we hadn't seen it or interacted with it. in a long time. And so to just see the fear and the hate bubble up in this country, it forces us to reckon with that. And I think it's important that we walk the walk, we lead by example, we lead with compassion. And also we can't tolerate intolerance. If people are trying to profit off of exploiting people or the environment, we need to stand up and say, that's not how we're going to do business in this country anymore.
That's a really interesting point. And I think you're right. The only way to remove the dark shadow self is to bring it into the light. And so yeah, it's a really, really interesting point.
Thanks. And I think it takes, cannabis visionaries who can deliver that message. I am not the cannabis expert, but I had the wonderful opportunity to interview the experts and include 40 of them in a documentary. But within that, part of my social responsibility that I took on was, if we're going to show female leadership, what type of women are we going to show? And so I made sure we looked at geographical distribution, what type of expertise they had, ages, ethnicities, body types, sexual orientations, all of that. Because what we find is that if we can see it, we can be it. Gina Davis says that in her work. And I think it's really true. Representation matters. And so if we want to encourage more people to come into the cannabis industry, we need to show them that there's somebody like them doing it. And it's a safe place and they can do it too.
Yeah, you did a really good job of that, actually. And something else too, when you were talking to Mara Gordon, for example, I think that so many people use the excuse that, well, we don't have the body of evidence that we need in order to, satisfy the power brokers in Washington and blah, blah, blah. And you talk to someone like Mara Gordon, who has, over the last 12 or so years, been documenting, writing down patient histories and documenting what their cannabis dosage has been and what impact that has had on their bodies and the healing that has come from it. And that it's almost as powerful to just make people aware of that as it is having that evidence. It's pretty astonishing that the evidence is out there, and it's powerful that you're talking about it.
Yeah, it's really amazing that part of the lie that we've been told about cannabis is that we don't have any evidence that it works. And once we start looking, we see that there is a plethora of cannabis studies about the efficacy, but that's not the studies that the U.S. government funds. They fund studies to prove the harms of cannabis. So it's been pushed to other scientists or even other countries to do this research for us. And when you start looking at the body of research out there, we actually see that cannabis can be a dosable medication for patients. And if we just train the doctors or the medical providers in how to prescribe it to treat certain things, we can then move away from all kinds of other pharmaceuticals. But the pharmaceutical companies don't want us to do that, right?
Of course not. Yeah, and therein lies a big chunk of the problem, because they're the ones who are funding campaigns for people who owe them favors later in the game, although they'd be reticent to admit that openly. But we all know that that is absolutely the case.
Well, and that's why Arizona was not successful in passing their 2016 adult use initiative.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons, and also something I've talked about on this show ad nauseum, because Arizona is where I happen to be, we have a very divided state assembly who never comes together on any issue, and they came together almost unanimously to pass hemp legislation. Hemp, right? And it was vetoed by the governor. You could only imagine that there would be no other reason to veto a bill that brought our very divided assembly together if it weren't for campaign finance by a pharmaceutical company, which makes fentanyl, which is killing people, that received FDA approval to move forward on their synthetic CBD.
Well, I hope that is part of the campaign for whoever's opposing him when he runs for re-election.
Exactly. Well, there's a really strong cannabis community here in the state of Arizona, surprisingly, given that it's such a conservative state. But we do have a pretty strong community of very, very vocal advocates who do not hesitate to speak their mind. So I'm actually really looking forward to the debates that come up publicly around this issue, because I have a feeling whoever advocates for cannabis, and likely it'll be David Garcia or whoever's opposing him, hopefully also, but it'll be an interesting fight, I think. And you're right, 205 didn't pass because of those very reasons.
And cannabis is an interesting topic because it doesn't just fall into, the conservative or the liberal thought process. It brings together all types of people. We have everyone from libertarians who think the federal government shouldn't be able to tell them what to do to, left-wingers who are pro-environment and pro-public schools, and, they come from a human rights perspective on cannabis. And there's everyone in between that, right? So it really is the next big social topic that we're talking about. We saw this in the marriage equality campaign, where state by state, they were approving it. And once there was a tipping point, the federal government made a decision. And cannabis support is building, and we're at that same tipping point. So it's really a matter of, whether the federal government's going to do something. It could be the executive branch, it could be Congress, or it could be the judicial system. Like, somebody, I think, is going to wise up and make a decision pretty quickly if they want to make sure they keep their jobs.
Well, and this coming election season especially is going to be very telling, because there's this sense of trepidation by a lot of people that there's going to be a huge shakeup this year, because of the division in the country and everything else. So it'll be interesting to see how this brings people together. And you're right, it is one of those issues that encompasses so many things that people are very passionate about, whether it be the economy or sustainability or health or social justice or, other aspects.
Yeah, it's everything from getting medicine to children, to helping our veterans so they're not on as many opioids that increase their chances of mental illness and suicide and things like that. I mean, it's so many different things.
And our ball players, our football players.
Yeah. There's a lot of professional athletes, you're right, who would love to use plant medicine as opposed to all these other pharmaceuticals that they're prescribed to protect their bodies and their brain.
Every single day they're given opiates or muscle relaxers or, antispasmodic medicine, this cocktail of poison, basically, that they wind up becoming addicts. And then, with all of the concussive injuries, I mean, we could go into that for hours, but it's just really interesting. But again, it's the women who have that nurturing spirit, who are bringing this to light. And, like so many social issues, it's the women who propel these issues forward and bring the compassion into it. So,
well, and I think you're right about women leading social movements and social issues. I also will add that it's more than just compassion. I don't want to say compassion is feminine and aggression is masculine, right? Everybody should be compassionate, in my opinion. But what women also bring to the cannabis industry, they see opportunity. So it's an opportunity to create the type of businesses that they want to work in. They don't have to necessarily be the senior vice president of something and see a bunch of men get promoted above them. They can be the CEO and the founder and hire the colleagues that they want to work with. And what we see when we look at female leadership across the board of all industries is that women hire more diverse colleagues, because we intuitively know that if you have multiple perspectives on things, your business is more successful. If we all think the same way in the board of directors, you're not going to see obstacles and challenges come your way, and you'll get blindsided, right? The other opportunity women see is they get to create the products that are going to fit into their lifestyle. Women aren't necessarily looking for the most THC possible, so they're couch locked for 3 days. Like, we've got stuff to do. We can't do that.
That's a funny way to put it.
We can't have the tallest bong ever built in our living room when grandma comes over, or we've got small children and things like that, right? We need products that fit into our lifestyle, that have a bit more discretion. So when we want to be open about our use, we can. And when you're meeting with the principal or the CEO of, or whatever, you don't have to publicize your cannabis use, because it's not their business unless you want to make it their business. So that's the other opportunity women see in cannabis. And by doing that, they're opening the door, because we're moving away from this stoner dude image that is alienating to women and men, right? If you don't see that as yourself, you may not use the product. But if you can have a topical product or something you take sublingually, or maybe you dissolve it into a cup of tea, or you have a odor locked bag so you can store everything and you don't necessarily have to publicize that you have it. I mean, those are the types of things that women are creating. And that's what's going to move the cannabis industry to that next level. We're already close to a $10 billion industry. If we don't have female leadership, it's not going to grow to the $50 billion industry that we think it can.
Yeah, so true. So true. So,
hey, this is Melissa Etheridge. I just wanted to make sure y'all knew I was here.
Ah, wonderful. Hi.
Hey, Melissa, this is Windy. Great to speak with you. Thank you for joining.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I was having a great time listening to you guys.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. And wow, there's so much to talk about. Windy, I'm going to go back to that thought after this quick break. So stick around, because when we come back, we'll be joined by the one and only Melissa Etheridge.
Snowden Bishop, the Cannabis Reporter, will be right back after these. Now that doctors and patients have discovered the many benefits of hemp-derived CBD, Alpine Miracle's nano-emulsion CBD formula is one of the most bioavailable on the market today. It's 100% THC-free, so you can order it online anywhere in the U.S. Order yours today at alpinemiracle.com. Scientists are just beginning to understand its essential role in maintaining optimal health. Get yours today. Use the code REPORTER and receive 10% off. Don't wait. Get it now at alpinemiracle.com.
You're busy, running around from work to kids to evening events. Healthcare shouldn't be adding to your daily running around. Simplify your healthcare with Healthterra for only $15 per month per individual, or $18 per month per family with up to 9 kids, by the way. You can eliminate doctor office visits with 24/7 access to doctors via phone, video, or the mobile app. Not only do you get prescriptions filled over the phone, but save up to 85% on those prescriptions. This is a supplemental plan and not insurance. Healthcare made easy. Healthterra.com.
You're listening to the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show with Snowden Bishop.
Hi, and welcome back to the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show. I'm your host, Snowden Bishop, here with filmmaker Windy Borman, talking about her amazing film, Mary Jane's The Women of Weed. And I am absolutely delighted to introduce you to our next guest, joining us by phone. She is an accomplished recording artist who has been advocating for social justice since her career began 3 decades ago. As a singer-songwriter and guitarist, she is best known for her melodic blend of rock, pop, and soulful Americana, with compassionate lyrics brought to life through her sultry vocals. She's a 2-time Grammy Award winner with 15 Grammy nominations to her credit. And in 2007, her recording of Need to Wake Up won an Academy Award for Best Original Song, featured in the groundbreaking documentary An Inconvenient Truth. She's an activist for a variety of causes, from LGBT to climate change. And as a cancer survivor who found healing through cannabis, she has become one of the most outspoken advocates for compassionate care and uses her music platform to raise awareness. I am delighted to introduce the one and only Melissa Etheridge. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the work you've been doing.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's a labor of love, I have to say.
Yeah.
It's been quite a journey, and I know you've been at it probably longer than I have even. I started in 2010 was when I wrote an article about cannabis for the very first time. But Windy and I were just talking about the film and the gender parity, that there have been gaps closed in the cannabis industry. And really, it's all owed to these very powerful women who are bringing compassion and healing to the world through this industry. And I'm really interested to hear how you became such an ardent advocate. And I know that it has to do with what you've spoken about quite a bit, which is your journey with cancer and finding healing through cannabis. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I've had a really fun life and an interesting life, and made the music and climbed the mountaintop and yay. And then, life happens and you start realizing there's more to it. And then the health crisis comes. And that's when I really sat down and let some things in that I had been witness to. One is what you were talking about, the feminine force and healing. Coming from the women's communities in the 80s and the 90s, I was surrounded by very strong women that, spoke of health and spoke of, the alternative and the homeopathic and plant medicine and all this stuff that was, all this pagan stuff that goes back that we used to be burned at the stake for. But now it's coming through because it's needed because of the failure of allopathic medicine. And so when I went on my cancer journey and realized, what they were offering me was a whole bunch of chemicals to put on top of the chemical wash that they were giving my body as a, chemotherapy, I found cannabis and started using it as medicine, which was very different than the social way that I was using it, before. Just not, I was rarely did I use it. And starting to use it every day to understand my own health and searching my own consciousness, exploring my consciousness is a means to health and understanding, and we're just, cannabis is just the tip of this iceberg. And that's why, you'll hear many of us in the last decade talking about, a paradigm shift. Well, that's what's happening here. And cannabis is leading the way, going through all the proper channels and, unfolding. Yeah, it's kind of messy, but it's really exciting.
It really is. And how did you and Windy become involved in this film together? Because I saw the film last night and I was enthralled throughout. And I just thought that the journey of women was just such a great way to approach this topic. How did you start working on that?
Well, Wendy contacted me, and when it was women and cannabis, I was like, yeah, win-win. Those are two of my favorite things. So I knew this was a message, and I knew she had a message to get out, and I knew she was putting it together in a way that I could completely support, and I could speak my mind in it, and she really let me do that.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And you're recording an album right now. Does it have anything to do with the advocacy that you're involved with right now?
Let me think. There's a couple of references, but I've always believed that my best advocacy is to be the best person I can be and to do my best every day and to tell the truth so people understand I am an artist who believes and uses cannabis as medicine and as a piece of my life. It's a part of my life. And so that's going to be a part of my music too. It's very influential creatively also. So, that's my advocacy there, is for people to know that.
I'm curious from an artist's point of view, because I hear a lot of people talking about how cannabis is actually helping them to open up that right brain, free flowing creativity and all of that. Did you notice a difference?
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes, the opening of the balance is what I call it. It's I believe our bodies and our spirits, and that is always wanting balance. And this is what cannabis does so well. It's what we reach for when we reach for chemicals, but cannabis does it harmlessly and naturally, and in a way that is in harmony with nature. And so this balance, when I partake of it, it makes me a better person. It makes me a better mother. It makes me part of this human community and this connection with nature, and it makes my life richer, and it makes my music so much more enjoyable, I believe.
Well, certainly your music has always been enjoyable to listen to. So,
Thank you.
I wonder how often you encounter people who question your support of the cannabis movement. Does that ever happen to you?
Only at the border when I was arrested. But
tell me about that.
No, that was me being it was last year actually. The Jeff Sessions talking empowerment sort of stuff. It was a North Dakota border crossing from Canada, and I was careless and had a vape pen, and well, that's so they went through all this stuff. Of course, I'm a middle-aged white woman, so I didn't have to worry about jail or anything. And it was just really unfortunate, but that it was funny because the sheriff who actually ended up booking me kept apologizing to me because North Dakota just passed their medicinal law, but they didn't have any guidelines, and he was like, I'm sorry. He just kept, I'm like, it's okay, buddy, it's all right, you're just doing your job. This is what needs to change, is these rules that everyone's been following that need to be looked at and changed, and that's what we're doing.
I hear about that all the time. People even crossing from states that regulate medical into or out of states that regulate for adult use into states that regulate only for medicinal. And especially right before California passed enacted its new adult use rule, I heard a lot of people just driving back and forth between Arizona and California being stopped by the dogs that are there supposedly under the immigration ICE and all of the officers that are there to check for illegal immigration. And, they get pulled over all the time because they're carrying their medicine with them, thinking, well, I'm going from one state to another and both have medical laws, so what's the big deal? But apparently that remains one of the biggest problems. Wendy, did that come up at all for you in your interviews?
Well, we definitely spoke to people that had various backgrounds and experiences with cannabis. We didn't end up including so much of the differences state by state in the film because we wanted the focus to be on female leadership and corporate responsibility. But it always comes up in film screenings and Q&As. I mean, we did a screening in Oklahoma City earlier this year because Oklahoma is voting on a medical cannabis initiative in June. And people came up to me in tears during the screening saying, I can't see my grandchildren because I use cannabis instead of opioids. There was a doctor who was from Colorado and had driven to Oklahoma, and because she had Colorado license plates, she got pulled over and arrested and had to call her dad to bail her out of jail. So she didn't have to stay there all weekend and miss speaking about the benefits of medical cannabis. And we just forget that there are states like that are ground zero for this type of work. When we stay in our bubbles of Colorado or California or, these other states where people can consume openly, we just forget what's at stake for other people to do the same.
Yeah, it is. It's hard. It's hard to remember what that was like, for people who had to, there are so many people in this country who are cannabis refugees at this point, and you can't put the genie back in the bottle. You can't unlearn the knowledge about the medical benefits. I mean, and that must be a little bit strange for you too, Melissa, because when you're touring and you go into states that are not regulation states, just to think how far behind they are in terms of the stigma and acceptance.
Yeah, it is very difficult, and it's a problem with my medicine and where I'm taking it, where I'm not, and if I can have it, and it is a problem, and it's just crazy times right now, and hopefully it's all leading to. It reminds me of the same-sex marriage things, when state by state would do it, and little by little, and things, and finally it was just like, okay, bam. And I'm waiting for the bam when we can all, agree on one thing, and sort of it be allowed, it be an alternative, and it's going to change a whole lot of stuff. But man, it's so where we need to be.
Yeah, with the LGBT movement and the gay marriage initiatives that were going on in the States, it seemed like that's right. Little by little it was happening. And, there was still the advocacy out there for it. And then all of a sudden, one day you wake up and at the Supreme Court, there was a celebration going on. And now it just seems so normal. But yet, like with cannabis, that has come so far in terms of the acceptance and the knowledge base that's out there in the general public and the mainstream media, then all of a sudden you have these factions come in, take power, and want to undo those liberties that just now seem so normal. I mean, you hear noises about it in Congress a lot, from people who are trying to satisfy a very small constituency in the United States who, somehow believes that we're all going to go to hell in a handbasket if cannabis becomes legal, or if two people who of the same sex decide that they love each other enough to get married. It's mind-boggling to me.
Well, I've always told people that I have a belief that when change is happening, when you are in the midst of it, when you are moving ahead into that uncharted territory, that you end up shining a light on a lot of ugly stuff that had been hidden because we're moving into a new light. So I saw that with LGBT movement and marriage. People would say just horrible things about, I have 4 children. It was, that I'm unfit to, be a mother and all this crazy stuff, and it comes from their own fear and then their own deep, dark place of, places I don't want to know about, but it comes from that. And so when we're looking at the cannabis movement, same thing. We are pulling everyone into the light about opioids, about pharmaceuticals, about our old stereotypes about the cannabis user, about our past history in the AMA. I mean, we are shining a huge light, and there are a lot of people who are filled with a lot of fear about that. So we're going to see some ugly stuff coming up, and that's just what happens right before a big change.
I've noticed that too. I have. And I think that, and you touched on this, Windy, in the film, I think that this is going to open up the doors for environmental concerns. I mean, once we can get the special interests out of the way and have our representatives actually take action on something that never should have been ostracized like cannabis has been for the last 80 years. I mean, it was unjust. The scheduling of cannabis in Schedule 1 was completely a lie to begin with, but the whole thing has just been so devastating to so many people. I mean, millions of people have had their families ripped apart and stuff like that. But once we get those special interests out of the way, it almost sets a precedent for how we can approach getting the same special interests out of the way to take care of some of our most fundamental problems, such as undrinkable water.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I heard from some cannabis activists who'd been working to legalize for a very long time, and they specifically connected the dots about money. Like in our society, sadly, money talks. And there was a lot of money to be had by keeping cannabis illegal because people could profit off of the war on drugs and private prisons and underemployment and things like that. Well, now that people are seeing that we can make billions with a B in cannabis, magically people are changing their minds. I mean, you have some very conservative thought leaders who are now coming out and saying, oh, I guess it's not so bad. They're not yet undoing all the terrible things that they did to incarcerate Black and brown people, but they're going to sit on the board and make $1 billion. But even that is a crack in the doorway for us to have those conversations, right? And now that we can start educating politicians, business owners, community leaders, religious leaders about this plant, and connect the dots for them, I think we're going to see the majority go up from 64% of Americans to almost 100% of Americans. And the politicians will jump on the bandwagon if they want to keep their jobs.
Yeah, I agree. It really is a matter of awareness, isn't it? And what must be really nice for you, Melissa, is to be able to use that platform and the audiences that are, captivated by your music, obviously, to be able to use that as a launch pad for this kind of advocacy.
Well, when having gone through, again, I have to compare it to the LGBT movement. When I came out as a lesbian in '93, I didn't know. I had no idea what it was going to be like. And I saw that all I did is I walked through, the next few years was to just speak truthfully and answer the questions. And that's then how I chose to be in the cannabis space is when I said, okay, this is an important part of my recovery, and I plan to be a cancer thriver, and for years and years. So I want people to know, and so I started speaking about it. And I certainly don't preach it from the stage. I've never have preached anything from the stage. It's just about the music. But in answering questions in those articles and in things, in offering my time to special cannabis programs like yours, to just speak that message, then people find that. And now with social media, my goodness, it gets right out there. So just by answering the questions and speaking my truth, that seems to be the best advocacy work I can do.
Yeah, well, it certainly does hold more weight when people are familiar with those who are about an issue. It, in a way, it lends the kind of credence to it that people who are lesser known could have for it. And, and it's so important and for filmmakers as well to bring this into public awareness. It's just such an important part of the journey, I'd say.
Well, thank you. And where I feel the Mary Jane's film is able to tap into other audiences, it really comes from the perspective of speaking to the skeptics. Like Melissa is a wonderful spokesperson for all the work that she does, and she's walking the walk, right? And so if we can include women of her caliber in a conversation, but have it be a safe invitation for people. We're not necessarily coming from the perspective in the Mary Jane's film that everybody needs to get stoned. I am an on-camera skeptic. I go on this journey and eventually become enlightened by the end of the film because I spoke to 40 amazing women who are leading in this space, right? And the mind shift that happens just over that 90-minute film in screenings is amazing. I mean, I have women coming up to me saying, I'm finally going to go to a dispensary and get something for my rheumatoid arthritis. Or I'm finally going to take my mom in so we can get her off some of these pharmaceuticals and get her back on plant medicine. Or I'm going to go talk to my partner because I now have a little bit more information and we can have an educated conversation about how does this come into our home, right? And so by having it be that safe place where I can ask the silly questions that they probably have, I find that we're winning over more women. And we know that women make the majority of the household purchase decisions and the health and wellness decisions in their families. So really want to move this forward, talk to the women. And that's what we're doing.
Amen. Amen, sister. So, well, you know what, Wendy, that was very powerful about the film. Because what happened is you made it entirely believable for people who had those awkward moments. Like I said in the beginning, you know, it's that sense of awkwardness because of that thick fog of stigma that's been with us for so long. You know, it's almost a cause for a little bit of embarrassment or a little bit of like, ooh, I'm not the cool person here who should know all about this stuff. But I think it's super powerful for people. Well, and because I've been an advocate for so long, it's hard to remember what that was like. But I can imagine that it was super powerful for people who still hold that stigma as truth, who still believe that marijuana is the gateway drug to all evil. So kudos for that. I mean, seriously, that was brilliantly conceived and well delivered. So congratulations.
Thank you. And it was authentic too. You know, I had started out as not understanding cannabis. I had literally never tried it before and I had ample opportunity, but it was never something I was interested in. But, you know, once I heard from these powerful, intelligent women, I realized that part of my journey needed to be to try it. And we could make that an empowering educational experience for folks at home. So, you know, as a woman, I could choose what I wanted. I could put together a group of women who could guide me through the process. It was all very consensual and safe. And it was a lot of fun too. I don't want to give away the ending of the film for everybody, but definitely stick around for the end.
Well, it was definitely worth sticking around for the end. So we won't give away any of the punchlines, but you know, it really was well done. And I really got a lot out of what you said too, Melissa. And I think it is so important to share that ever so personal journey of healing and, you know, the way that this has affected you, because, you know, it is completely authentic, like Wendy's story is authentic. And it's powerful. It's powerful to hear that personal admission. And I think also you mentioned when you came out, I think that empowered so many other people to embrace who they are and to feel good about their lives for a change for some of them. I mean, you hear about a lot of teenage suicide and people just feeling like they've been ostracized from their families or they just don't fit in or whatever because of who they are. And I mean, that is very powerful. And, you know, congratulations to you too.
Oh, thank you so much.
So if you had a last takeaway, Melissa, that you would want people to know most about you, about your advocacy, what you hope for the future, what would that be?
I would say, I would hope that people understand or maybe start to get the idea that it's about this human experience. You know, it's about, you know, I'm in my late 50s now, and you know, I've done a lot of things and seen a lot of things and been around a few times, and it is about quality, you know, of this experience. And what are you going to give your power to? And what are you going to give your thoughts to? Because that's where your power lies, is whatever you're fearing and thinking. And I would hope that maybe people could look at me and my journey and see that we have more power than we ever thought we did. And it's inside, it's in ourselves, and it's in the choices that we make. And I would hope that my life and my music inspires people to be in spirit, because that's where inspire comes from, to be in spirit when they make those choices. And it's been a pleasure to be on your radio show. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and I wish you absolutely the best of luck with your new album. I can hardly wait to hear it. So I'll definitely be putting information about you on the post when we archive this episode. So thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Really appreciate
Thank you so much
being here.
And thank you, Wendy, for all your work.
Oh, thank you, Melissa.
All right. Bye-bye, you guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Ah, wonderful.
Isn't she amazing?
She's amazing. I could just feel her warmth through the phone. It was great. So I'm going to ask you what I asked Melissa. So if there's one last takeaway that you would like for people to know about you, or about your work, or about what you hope for the future, what would that be?
I really hope that the people who see the Mary Jane's documentary view it as an invitation to have a conversation, whether that's with a family member, a medical provider, maybe even some colleagues. But my hope is that we demystify cannabis so they have a starting point to just ask some questions, right? If they're a bit more curious than they were before, and we can move away from dogma to, open-mindedness, that's our access point to have this conversation. And no matter how they come at it, whether it's a health and a wellness product, whether it's a business opportunity or a social justice or a sustainability issue, there is an access point for the audience to see how cannabis could fit into their life and their community.
You know what? That is definitely word for the wise. So I am getting the signal that it is time for us to start wrapping this up. But thank you so much for being with me today, Wendy. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's a joy to be able to talk about progress we're making in the cannabis industry with you.
Absolutely it is. So, once again, a show must come to a close. These conversations are hard to end. They're just compelling. I'd like to personally thank my guests, Windy Borman and Melissa Etheridge, for sharing their insights and knowledge with us today. If you'd like to learn more about the work that they are doing, please visit us online at thecannabisreporter.com. Click podcast to find today's episode, and I will post their bios and photos and information about Windy's film and about Melissa's music so that you can find them. We have a lot of others to thank. First, I would like to express our gratitude for our radio sponsors, Alpine Miracle, HealthTerra, and Compassionate Certification Centers. We certainly couldn't be doing this without you. I'd also like to thank Eric Goodall for our theme song, Evergreen, our engineers at DigiLabs for making us shine, and I'd also like to thank our program directors at XRQK Radio Network and Society Bites for distributing our show. And last but not least, thank you to all of you for listening around the nation. I'm your host, Snowden Bishop, inviting you to join me again next week, same time, same place, for another episode of the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show. Until we meet again, be safe, stay informed, share what you've learned, and make it a great day.
Evergreen's cool.